I'm excited to introduce our moderator this evening. But before I do that, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for joining us. My name is Jeff Vega. I proudly serve as the president and CEO of the Princeton Area Community Foundation. When the pandemic first hit, the Community Foundation quickly responded by launching our COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Fund. Supported by many of you, and along with many of our grant-making partners, we've raised over $3 million. These grants were put out into the community quickly, and they were helping nonprofits that were helping people with emergency needs, such as food insecurity, rental assistance, childcare for essential workers, and others. However, the arts and culture sector has also been impacted by COVID-19. Many organizations have had to close their doors to the public and find new ways to engage audiences. Tonight's discussion will focus on how innovative and collaborative philanthropy will help keep the arts alive in New Jersey. I am very excited to introduce the moderator for tonight's panel, Evie Colbert. Evie currently serves on the New Jersey Governor's Restart and Recovery Commission as an advocate for the arts. She is a founding board member of Montclair Films and serves on the boards for the Montclair Kimberly Academy and the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. She is also an independent film producer and the vice president of Spartina Productions, which she co-owns with her husband, Stephen Colbert. Now, thank you to all of you again for joining us this evening. I kick it off to Evie. Evie?
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to a really engaging and robust conversation about philanthropy during times of crisis. A little bit of background about me. I first want to give a shout out to all of you who support community foundations. My husband and I have been advocates of community foundations for a long time. We have a fund with a foundation in our hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, and we find it to be very effective in terms of making your philanthropy both easy and impactful and serving communities you care about. So thank you all on this call for supporting the Princeton Community Foundation. So, as Jeff mentioned, in April, I was asked by Governor Murphy to join his Restart and Recovery Commission, which was an enormous honor for me. But in the spirit of knowing what you don't know, I knew that I did not know enough about the arts and culture sector in New Jersey to really have an impactful voice on that commission alone. So I created what I sort of think of as my brain trust. Every Monday morning for the past 10 months, I've met with John Schreiber, the CEO of NJPAC, Anne Marie Miller from Art Pride, New Jersey, Allison Tratner from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, and Sharnita Johnson from the Dodge Foundation. And together we've talked a lot about how to advocate for support for the arts and culture sector. One of the first things that really became apparent to us, just as Jeff was mentioning, was that when the pandemic first hit, everyone's focus, rightly so, was on providing food and housing and support for essential workers. And so as advocates for the arts, we thought we needed to find another way to provide support because CARES funding probably wouldn't be coming through for the art sector yet. Out of that idea was born the New Jersey Arts and Recovery Relief Fund, which you're going to be hearing about this afternoon. It was created with seed dollars from the Grunin Foundation, the Dodge Foundation, and Prudential. And that fund, which is housed here at the Princeton Community Foundation, has been actively distributing grants to arts nonprofits since the fall. And we're still actively fundraising for it because, as is so often the case, as soon as we raise the money, it goes right out the door. So I think that now that we've talked about that, I would like to introduce our panel. With us today, we have Allison Tratner, who I mentioned is the Executive Director of the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. Allison has been with the Council since 2008 and served as the Executive Director since 2018. Allison? Hello.
Hello.
Also with us today is Sharnita Johnson, who I just mentioned earlier. Sharnita is the Arts Program Director of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation and also is the co-chair of the New Jersey Arts and Recovery Relief Fund that I was just talking about. Hi, Sharnita.
Hello, Evie.
Hello. And finally with us is Michelle Russo. Michelle is the president and CEO of Young Audiences in New Jersey and Eastern Pennsylvania, which is a leading arts education in a leading nonprofit in arts education. Michelle will really be providing the boots on the ground perspective of this conversation.
Hi.
Thank you all. And we're just going to have a really easygoing, robust conversation. And if you have questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. So Allison, I'm going to kick it off with you. Maybe you could take a moment to share with us how the pandemic has impacted the arts and culture sector as a whole. I know it's a really broad question, but I think it'll lay context for what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to give it a try. Definitely would love the input of those on the panel, which I think maybe I'll back up from before I answer, I'm going to just give a little context as to what the New Jersey State Council on the Arts is. It's my every single day I live and breathe it, but I do know that for some it's new. And so I'll just start by saying that the State Arts Council is an agency of state government. We're housed inside the Department of State, run by the New Jersey Secretary of State, Tahisha Way, and also a governor appointed board. We have been around a while. We were founded in 1966, and today we are the largest funder of the arts in the state. And so this year, also just by way of context, I'll say that our grant making budget this year hovered around 19 million. With that, we administered hundreds of grants to support nonprofit arts organizations, arts education and service projects, and artists in every county. So, 19 million, it sounds like a lot. It feels like a lot to get out the door, but it's really nothing compared to the devastating financial losses that the arts sector has experienced statewide since last March. So now to actually get to answer your question, I think the unique nature of the pandemic, the fact that it was the results were restrictions, and because of all of the risks, it makes the creative sector nationwide really the hardest hit sector in the country. And it makes sense if you think about it, because the arts bring people together, figuratively and literally, which we couldn't do. In New Jersey, to give you a sense of what the reality is when we're open and thriving, the New Jersey arts industry is an essential part of our state's local and statewide economies, employing thousands of people and attracting millions of people, tourists and residents alike, who are staying in hotels and shopping and eating locally. And, really in some immeasurable ways also, the arts really contribute to the vibrancy that makes the New Jersey cities, communities, and towns that we all know and love so special, right? Some numbers. Pre-pandemic, New Jersey's nonprofit arts organizations generated more than $660 million in economic impact annually. And today, because of the catastrophic financial losses caused by the pandemic-related closures and cancellations, the losses are in the hundreds of millions, and that grows every single day. And really, without sounding too dramatic, many of the organizations that we at the Council fund and beyond are really fighting for their lives. On the flip side of that, more than half the artists and the creative sector workers who make up the heart of the arts industry they're fully unemployed, more than half, and most of them without affordable health care. It's a real critical issue. I should say, though, at the same time, most of these arts organizations and these artists have found a way to use their art and their creativity to contribute to community healing, to help create, hope and create morale in a time of real struggle, usually for free. Unfortunately, right? I think it's not an overstatement to say, myself personally, professionally, I can say people from all ages and all backgrounds are turning to the arts to connect right now, even if it's virtually. So I think I'll go on a little more, but stop me if I need to. But I do want to just, I'll keep going a little more to say that, as we inch closer to what feels like light at the end of the tunnel, we don't know what to expect from the coming weeks and months. Evie, we say this all the time, the arts industry was among the first to close and could possibly be among the last to fully open. That has real tangible consequences on the last year, but also on the next year, right? So what we do know is that a true recovery absolutely is one that must position the arts industry to endure this crisis, to continue to endure this crisis so it can be here on the other side. There's a lot at stake, right? I mentioned the economic revitalization and jobs, but there's also the fact that the arts foster dialogue and unity in the face of issues of social injustice, which we know the arts are a critical tool for that kind of action and change, which is so needed right now. So at the council, we consider it our obligation to try to find the ways to help those organizations and individuals figure out how to weather this, to survive long enough to build on the real incredible ingenuity and reinvention that these last 12 months have forced. Because the arts industry is really no different than any other industry across the globe that has had to just completely adapt. And there's that word, pivot, right? They are doing things in a different way than they ever have before. The same is also true for funders, right? So at the council, we know that the inequities present in our society that have been exacerbated by the overlapping challenges of the past year, it's our job to ensure that we do our jobs differently. Our funding has to support and shift accordingly to address those issues. So we will spend the foreseeable future at the council trying to figure out ways to equitably serve as many people as we can, but we know that work doesn't happen fast and we certainly can't do it alone. And so thankfully, Evie mentioned, we don't have to. As I said at the, we get to work together in so many different ways. It's those Monday morning meetings for sure, but in other ways too. We in the philanthropic sector in New Jersey were more in sync than we ever have been before. We're all working together, committed to find a pathway for fiscal viability for this essential industry. The New Jersey Arts and Culture Recovery Fund is a really great example of that. It's literally a coalition of funders and philanthropists who've gathered around the idea the arts matter, because even with so many competing and worthy causes, the arts matter for a million reasons. And so the last thing I want to say with regard to impact or how this affects the arts industry right now, I think the idea of fiscal viability is a tricky concept in this climate. And as a funder, we've had to challenge ourselves to really look differently than we ever have before at the way we distribute money. We're doubling down on our general operating grants in an effort to give organizations the flexibility to navigate through this crisis in the way that works for them. We learned quickly that one survival strategy does not fit all, and that one group's hibernation was another group's explosive online content. So right now, we believe the most important kind of funding is mostly unrestricted. Right? For us, that's a little risky. We do our due diligence and we stay in communication, and then we just have to trust, right? The healthiest of organizations right now are making plans and then making contingency plans and then contingency plans behind their contingency plans, right? We've learned from listening to groups and artists and our fellow funders that with all the uncertainty going on right now, there's a great deal of loss, but there's also a great deal of hope. So I guess I've talked a lot, so I apologize, I suppose, but I'll say right now I do believe that there's an amazing amount of loss, an amazing amount of hope, and I think that with the right support, the sector can rebound from these devastated losses.
Thank you so much. It's funny, I was just prior to this on a commission call with the governor where he asked me to sort of report a little bit on the arts and culture sector. And that's almost exactly what I said, is that there's enormous uncertainty, but extreme excitement, right? I think everybody, not just people who work in the arts, everybody's ready to go somewhere, to see something, to see a performance. But at the same time, there's the caution, and how do we make it safe? Or how do you rehire people when you haven't had revenue for a year? And how do you make the capital improvements that you need to make it safe? So there's just this this pull that's difficult at this moment.
I think it's that point, it's that uncertainty that I think as funders, the idea that we have to be flexible and infuse a little more trust than maybe we have in the past. So all this uncertainty doesn't prevent them from taking steps forward.
Exactly. And Sharnita, I wanted to ask you about that, because I think that's exactly what you guys have been able to do at Dodge, and also with the Recovery Fund. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how you can pivot your focus of your philanthropy, particularly with a lens to making sure that it's as equitable as possible, knowing how to reach as many people as you can.
Sure. So, and I'll just give a little bit of background on the Dodge Foundation as well. The Dodge Foundation is a New Jersey-based philanthropy private foundation. We're about 45 years old, and we support currently the arts, environment, education, informed communities, which is about community-based journalism and storytelling, and the Dodge Poetry Festival, which is every other year in Newark. It was virtual this year. And we've been working and really interrogating and thinking about how the foundation operates and how we can invest our resources in a more equitable way. And we've been really doing that self-examination for a few years, actually, and have really started to pivot our work. And then in the midst of the pandemic, that really gave us an opportunity to really think about how we were making our funding decisions. We've created an equity framework, which is actually on our website if folks are interested, and really trying to understand how, we don't want to fix a broken system. We actually want to remake a new system. And the pandemic, the Recovery Fund at the start of the pandemic really gave us an opportunity to think about that. And we were really able to create this new fund with the steering committee that sort of centered those communities and those organizations that we knew were most vulnerable. And those communities and those organizations are across the board the communities that were most impacted by the pandemic, and those are Black and Latinx communities. So we were really, as we started to put together the foundation for the fund, thinking about, well, how do we make sure that these communities and these organizations have the resources that they need? They may not have the same networks. They may not have the same level of funding. And Dodge has always been a funder that made primarily general operating grants. So we were already doing that practice, which was very helpful because we were able to provide, to shift project grants into general operating. We were able to support, in addition to the Arts Fund, other collaborative funds, which we were able to get dollars out fairly quickly to organizations. But the foundation, as Allison said, the State Arts Council has a $19 million budget, and Dodge has a little over $2 million arts budget. So there's a huge sort of gap. And in that gap is where I think the Recovery Fund was most helpful. And we were able to, again, shift those dollars, get to the communities that we knew were most vulnerable, and understanding that all of the communities are vulnerable, and really making sure that we were supporting individual artists. So through the intermediaries, which Michelle will talk about later, we were able to get dollars, not just to organizations, but really into the hands of these culture workers, which New Jersey is home to previously 22,000 culture workers. So we knew that they were a most vulnerable workforce. And we were really glad to be able to do that. But again, through this equity lens, understanding that some organizations and some communities aren't set up in a way that gives them the opportunities to reach out to these networks and to get the resources that they might need very quickly, which we were happy to do.
Before I want to jump in, I know we want to hear from Michelle on that as well, but Sharnita, would you have any advice for the philanthropists on the call on how they can prioritize their giving during this time of crisis? I mean, what we're talking about this afternoon is a different way to look at philanthropy. And I think what we've all been saying, and I think it's particularly impactful, is the collaborative nature that everybody is sort of rolled up their sleeves and working together. But do you have any specific advice for the people on the call?
So, I mean, I just say sort of nationally, statistically, 60% of arts dollars go to about 2% of arts organizations. And
Wow.
those tend to be the larger organizations that may have a board that's has the ability to fundraise in a different way,
Yeah.
that may have endowments, that may be set up structurally and financially in a way that has allowed them, as Allison mentioned, some organizations were able to go into hiatus because they had these reserves. So thinking about organizations that don't have a reserve, that don't have an endowment, that may or may not have a fundraising board, that are more grassroots in their structure. So thinking about those types of organizations, which are the ones that we prioritize through the fund, and of course, the fund was supporting, we got to almost every county in the state, I believe. So we were very strong across the state. But again, thinking about those organizations that are more grassroots, that are smaller, that may not have those financial systems or resources in place.
That's great. That's great advice. And Michelle, maybe you can expand on a little bit more of sort of what engagement and what arts education is looking like in the schools, and basically sort of what is the role of the arts in the schools now during this moment.
Sure. So I'm happy to bring an arts moment into this conversation, because young audiences are, just to give a little overview, we're 100% arts education. So good news, we work in schools. Bad news, we work in schools. So in the time of pandemic, when we can't physically be in the school buildings, and anybody who's listening now who knows what's been happening with schools is the format has changed many, many times throughout the course of the year. And so as we prepared to pivot to work virtually, it's just been one hurdle after another to make sure that we can actually continue to do our work. And the way that we do, that Young Audiences does our work, we work in all of New Jersey and Eastern Pennsylvania. And in a typical year, we're in upwards of 600 schools. I don't know what our number is this year. It's significantly lower. But we work with artists, with teaching artists who, part of their career is dedicated to being in classrooms, performing for student audiences, and working directly with teachers on integrating the arts into their teaching. So we have been able to continue our work, and visiting programs is not what it used to be, but we're able to see some of it. And we have a program happening at a school in Hamilton. And one of the things that, Allison, you brought up previously was about building community and connection through the arts. And we always believe in that 100% all the time. And this program that's happening right now with theater teaching artist Summer Dawn, she's working with 4th grade students at G.E. Wilson School in Hamilton. And they did a playwriting residency, and they performed it on Zoom. And so I was able to watch the performance of it. And not only could you see the collaboration and the sort of idea building of the students working together on the story that they created, but you could see the way they were reflecting their experiences. So the premise of the story is that there's a secret kingdom, magical kingdom, where all the fairies and the superheroes live. But some of the fairies and superheroes get sick, and they have to have medicine. I mean, this is like they're expressing their lives. And of course, there's always a bad guy. There's always a protagonist. They know the story structure. Our teaching artist has taught them how to put a good story together. And so there's the bad guy who comes in and wants to give an evil potion as medicine, and all of the superheroes have to come together to make sure that the ones who are sick get the good medicine. And so you can see how these children are just reflecting their lived experiences, and also creating, I mean, we don't know what's happening in each of their lives, but they're creating a resolution in this story that is positive. And so that sense of community and healing that can happen in an arts experience is something that we hold dear all the time, and especially right now, which makes us really happy to be able to continue to do work, even though it's difficult and different this year.
You mentioned that you give grants to artists. Can you expand on that just a little bit more? Because I think we've been talking a little bit this afternoon about basically taking a leap of faith sometimes with your philanthropy, the need that everybody has for general operating, but sometimes an individual artist, a funder may not even know sort of how broad their talent is or their scope of what they do. Can you just tell us about your program and how you identify these artists and how you know that they will basically continue to work in the field?
Yeah, we sustaining our field of teaching artistry has been really important to us throughout this whole crisis. You know, when the schools all shut down a year ago, we just knew that our artists were all unemployed entirely. They may not have all of their work through us, but they're working in other venues and performing in every other way that an artist works. And it was an immediate pain point for us to know that our artists were going to be in that position. And so we knew, you know, talking about the flexibility of funding, we knew we wanted to be able to honor their contracts through the end of June. We didn't know exactly how we were going to do that, but we were not going to give up on trying. And through the flexibility of funders, the New Jersey State Council on the Arts was one of the first to come forward and say, we know you're not going to be able to complete this program, use these funds however you want to. That gave us a lot of feeling of confidence to be able to talk with our other funders to be able to do that. And we honored all of their contracts through the end of June to the tune of about $334,000. So we're glad to be able to do that. We used some of our reserves and we got some additional donations in that way. And I will personally go to my grave grateful for being able to do that. Grateful to the Young Audiences Board and to all of our donors and everybody else. But then, you know, of course, the crisis didn't end June 30th. And we continued to prepare to work virtually with all of our programs, but we also were just knowing that we weren't going to be doing as much work. And thank goodness to the New Jersey Arts and Culture Fund to be able to, we sought funds that were available through it to be an intermediary to give grants to our artists, relief grants. And we had been really hopeful for this opportunity. We had been advocating for it, and we were really pleased that we were able to do that. And so, you know, as a nonprofit organization, we were able to define our process, and the trust was like number one, trust and the fewest hurdles possible. At the point that we did this a couple of months ago, we knew that some of our artists were suffering and struggling for months and had filled out hundreds of different applications for this kind of aid, and that's all these things. And so we created a process, and when I say we, I give credit to the Young Audiences staff who are phenomenal and who thought through all this so beautifully. But we made the application to really be so basic. It was available only to our artists, so the rest of the world of artists didn't know about it. And we asked for a definition for them to define their hardships. So we listed some typical hardships of housing insecurity, things that Sharnita mentioned, food insecurity, childcare, medical, things like that. And we asked them to identify what percentage of their income they had lost since the pandemic. And that was basically it. We anonymized the results. And so the staff who were scoring everything didn't see the names of the folks who were, you know, seeking these funds. And so, because we wanted to have another level of just like, it's just the facts, you know? And so the relief funds we were able to give was approximately $50,000 to 44 artists, and the amounts were somewhere, but were either 1,000, 1,500, or 2,000. And we also, with other funds we had gotten, some other relief funds, we dedicated a smaller pot of funds for technology reimbursement for teaching artists who had, invested in all kinds of new equipment and systems to be able to do their work. And so that was another pot of about $11,000, which covered, for the 23 artists who got support, about 25% of what they had spent. So this is not, this doesn't fix everything, if we look at just for young audiences, and there's many other organizations who work with teaching artists, we are probably down by about $500,000 in terms of how much we are typically paying artists every year. That's the loss of work that we're experiencing. And so then that's the loss of work that our artists are experiencing. So this small amount of $61-ish thousand, which we're incredibly grateful for, is still a small piece of the puzzle for many of our artists. So there's more that needs to be done there.
I have another question for you. I know how closely you work with schools, and I know that New Jersey has been a leader in arts education within the schools, but I think there's a little concern that as the schools have to cut their budgets, perhaps they may cut their arts education. Are there ways that private philanthropy can help with that situation, or are there organizations that are partnering with the schools to fill those gaps if they see that they exist?
We, as much as we possibly can, offer scholarship opportunities for schools, grant opportunities for schools. When we are given those kinds of grants that are flexible in that way, we will offer discounts, half-price programming, however we can make it work so that a school can work with us. So again, that kind of flexible funding to go directly to a school program really helps us, because it helps us just be nimble and responsive to a school's need and not be tied down to this particular program has to happen in this particular place. And especially in this time, schools' abilities to work with us just really varies week by week, depending on what's happening. So we've had to be just as nimble and be ready to work in a school 2 days out. Usually it's a month or two before. Schools usually do not move that fast, but they're making quicker decisions because of the way things are, constantly changing.
Got it. Thank you. I think Mike is monitoring the chat. I think we have a few questions.
Yes, we do. We have one question regarding reopening for business. And I think a good way to ask this question are, what are you hearing from organizations on the tremendous needs that are needed for these arts organizations and culture organizations to really open up?
Allison, maybe we actually have, one thing we haven't mentioned is we created what we call the Arts and Culture Working Group, which is, Michelle is on it, and it's a group of leaders of arts organizations across the state. And we meet in order to basically advance our advocacy when we don't exactly have an ear. The governor's administration has been incredibly receptive, and they allowed us to create this working group, which then reports to the commission. But recently we asked these organizations for what we called a little snapshot, right, of what things are like now and what they're looking towards as they look to reopen. And I know, Allison, hopefully maybe you have some of those answers in your head. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I don't have them committed to memory, but I can tell you that, part of what I said earlier about allowing organizations the flexibility to do with their funds what they know they need to do is about that. There's so much uncertainty, but what they do know is that they need, those with facilities that are open to the public have a lot of challenges ahead of them to not only outfit physically, they need HEPA filters and touchless bathrooms and sanitizing stations and PPE. They also have communications challenges, right? Because in addition to making your space safe to welcome the public back, audience confidence and consumer confidence needs to be built back, right? The community needs to know that these arts organizations are up to par, health and safety wise, right? We've heard it said many times that producers of arts events, programs, any discipline, whether it's visual arts or performing arts, theater, they're in the business now of marketing, not just what they're doing, but how they're going to do it, right? They have to welcome people back in the door and with new messages and language and tools that they've never had before. But I should say it hasn't stopped them, right? Because innovation is what they're best at, I would say. I might be biased, but so that's a really sort of long-winded answer. I don't have a dollar figure. I can't tell you because I don't think they know. So it's about, I think, giving organizations the runway they need to, like I said, project what they think they'll need, and then face the reality every single day as it continues to change.
And also, oh, sorry, Allison.
I was just going to say those costs, those expenses, and the inability to project revenue are, without the support now from funders to be able to take those steps forward, not knowing if your projections are accurate because they have no way of knowing. So being able to take those steps forward, the funding to do that is what's critical. To be able to have the confidence to take those steps.
And I would just add that in addition to organizations trying to figure out how to bring people together, I've been hearing from a lot of my grantees and our grantees that the technology piece will remain a part of the way that they do business. So they will continue to stream, they will continue to do remote learning, and having the appropriate technology. It's not sort of holding up your phone and recording a play. It really does require another level of expertise and another level of equipment. So I think that those are things that organizations are thinking about, upgrading their technology and cameras and production and training for staff, upskilling staff. So those are costs that had not necessarily been factored into operations.
That is such an interesting point, right? It's sort of what you keep with, what we keep with us after this is over. And I think that there are, again, we don't know exactly what that will cost either, but there are a lot of technological expenses to that.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, on that point, Evie, we know that so many of the organizations who've just launched into technology, like in the ways that Sharnita's describing, it's expanded their reach. It has broadened their audiences and in some cases internationally, where they had been more regional before. The challenge there, or the multiple challenges there, include how do you maintain that sort of that audience and patron engagement, and how do you monetize it? Right? How do you make it so that it's financially, so that it's a feasible model? Because right now, patrons just don't pay for virtual experiences the way they would pay to come sit in a seat or walk through a space. So it's a good news, bad news situation.
Right, right. And it's interesting, you have two audiences then, right? You have your in-person people that you want to market to and cater to, but now you have this broader reach of virtual audience that you don't want to lose. So you have to kind of split your focus or be creative, but it's a creative industry. I'm sure they'll figure it out. Mike, did we have any other questions?
Yes, we have one regarding the gap of funding that Sharnita talked about earlier. Regarding, are there more details on the difference between the Arts Council giving 60 million with Dodge giving 2 million? Where does the difference? How do we make up that difference?
That's an interesting question. Go ahead, Sharnita. You got some thoughts?
Want me to take it, or are you taking it?
I mean, I think we both can, because I think individual donors really fill that gap. And before the pandemic, and as a part of the recovery fund and in the future, individual giving will remain a really critical piece of this puzzle. And again, the recovery fund sort of filled a really important gap immediately that may or may not exist in the future. So we are glad that we have this infrastructure now that we've set up with the Community Foundation, that we can receive these dollars and grant these dollars. And as Allison mentioned, we're still fundraising for the fund. The need is still great. And again, the power of individual donors cannot be forgotten.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that that even with the State Arts Council's dollars and Dodge's dollars, I think for the State Arts Council, if we look at an operating budget for an organization of any size, the council's dollars make up, it could be about 2 to 5% of their budget, right? So there's still a lot of room for more funders to come on in, and especially in a year where revenue is unpredictable. I think that there is plenty of need to go around.
I think that's one of the great things that I personally have witnessed. I'm a New Jersey newcomer. I've only lived here 20 years.
Only.
Which I can't believe. But I think it's quite moving, the collaborative nature that is sort of happened for us in the arts sector, but I think it's happened in lots of sectors throughout the state where everybody's sort of saying, let's do this together. How can we help? As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, the governor has formed a CEO council that is a group of CEOs that are in New Jersey, and they are actively supporting various different ways that they need, the sectors that need help, including we're hoping they'll send us some support for the fund that we're talking about right now. But there's a lot of wonderful examples of community and collaboration that have come out of this, and I think that's going to stay, right? Hopefully, when things open back up, we'll still meet every Monday, guys.
Hope so.
I do too. How about any other questions, Mike, or should I look in the chat?
Yeah, so here's a interesting question from Beth. She says that she thinks that we said that 60% of donations goes to just 2% of arts organizations. If that is correct, what are your thoughts on a more sustainable financial models to support? And how there's any new marketing or messaging to broaden that base support?
I will. That is a 2017 statistic from the Helicon Collaborative report, not just money. So that is a national stat. I don't think we have those stats in New Jersey, although we need to sort of figure that out. But again, it's skewed toward larger organizations that have longer histories, that have capacity to have endowments. So thinking about organizations that are smaller, grassroots organizations, startup organizations that are maybe the board is just family and friends. And so when they're doing fundraising, they have a very limited pool. So I think that we were successful with the recovery fund in that we were able to support those organizations that were serving communities, vulnerable communities and vulnerable leaders. And so really understanding the landscape of the communities that you live in, that you recreate in. We have pre-pandemic, we have a very robust and vibrant arts and culture sector. So when we're open and when you're thinking about what you're going to participate in, there's so many amazing theaters and dance companies and visual arts organizations to participate in across the spectrum. So think about those smaller organizations sometimes. Double your donation, Giving Tuesday, give on Wednesday too. There are lots of ways that we can fill in those gaps.
And I think that the recovery fund it sort of can do your work for you, right? One donation to the recovery fund can then be split and given to lots of organizations. So it's an effective way to spread your dollars further, I suppose.
One of the things about the recovery fund that I think Sharnita mentioned was that, as I talked about how we at the State Arts Council are really looking at equity and trying to shift our grant making through that lens, and Dodge has certainly, been a leader in that work, and through the fund, because it was set up quick, right? And because we have the PACF model that's really helping us to be nimble and flexible, we can use that lens to really focus dollars in that way. And I think I think young audiences is another one of the leaders as far as organizations doing really critical equity work. And I know personally, we at the State Arts Council have learned a great deal from Michelle and her team and the work that you've done digging into looking at the importance of equity and not just, funding, but service.
Yeah, I would say we're on the path, and we've spent a few years now looking at our operations and our programming. And I do think, referencing back to our re-granting that we did this year, and the relief funds we provided for artists, I really feel that was an outcome of us really thinking deeply about how we work with our artists and support them and work in partnership with them. And, even, one of the little things that we did that I think is good for any philanthropist is like, as we were developing our application process, we had artists like chime in on it. Like, do you think this is an okay question to ask? Like, are you good with this level of visibility into what's happening with you right now? So always connecting with the person who's the key stakeholder. What do you need? Like, how can we make this easy for you? So whatever that looks like and whatever your way of giving is, whether you're on a foundation board or whether you're an individual donor, every organization and every artist out there knows what they want to do with, if someone walked in my door with $100,000, I'd be like, okay, great. Now we can do that thing that's on our list. I'm not, so there's that is there. And I think there's a richness of creativity, ideas, innovation that is not realized yet in all of the art sector, because we don't always have the support we need. So reaching out and being in communication can really be illuminating too, for what is the need within this organization that I know, and how can I help them get there? Not only right now, but like the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan.
Betsy also has asked a question that kind of feeds off of that in terms of, do you think this is an opportunity to reset the way artists are valued? To me, that's such an interesting question, because I think sometimes, you don't appreciate what you have until you lose it. And I think the entire country is missing the arts. And so is there a moment here to, I don't know, reset the appreciation in some kind of way, or the national conversation about the importance of arts and culture? We talk internally a lot about the power of the economic power that this sector has within the state and the country, but it's also, there's a huge emotional value that is hard to quantize and talk about, but it's there and people are missing it. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that. I just thought I'd throw it out because it's a really interesting point. Anyone?
Yeah, it's sort of like every day I want that to be understood by everybody.
I know.
In education especially,
Yeah.
because there are many children who don't have the arts in their lives in a meaningful way on a consistent basis for whatever reason. So I every day I want children to have the arts in school. And, we've seen in our programming, and everybody here has experienced something over the past year where you felt a sense of connection and community and just a way to grapple with this world. And I do hope that the connection to artists remains strong, because I think one of the things that came up was like the online content that's available. Like, I can go on and get free stuff from across the world. Who are the artists that are actually in the schools in my neighborhood? Who are the artists who are doing work near me? Who are these individual humans? It's
an interesting moment where we've seen we've seen more intimate views of a lot of our artists, right? Because they're broadcasting from home or Zooming from, there's in some ways there's this, they're in your living room in a way they've never been before. And I said that to my husband. Some of his Zoom interviews are so more intimate than having the person in person. And I think that maybe we're coming to understand artists in a different way, right? They're not the mystique of celebrities. They're artists, and they're still creating. I think that's the powerful thing, is even without venues, there has been an enormous amount of art created across the country that has brought a lot of comfort and solace to people, I think. And so hopefully that's recognized in some way. I don't know how, but I certainly have appreciated it. Mike, any other questions, or are we wrapping up?
Oh, we have just one more, and it's how long do you think the sector will need the recovery fund, which I know is probably a interesting answer.
I don't know. Allison, Sharnita, I don't know. I mean, forever.
Well, hey, forever or maybe not, right? I think that what we have said as a steering committee is that we are going to stick around and fundraise as long as the sector needs us to. And so we don't have any formal plans of an end date. But the uncertainty is crazy. The Governor Murphy's budget for next year has got a robust amount of money support for the arts. We don't know if that will come to be. We'll find out in the summer, right? And maybe that changes things. But for now, I think that we are going strong fundraising because the need is now. And the thing about the Arts and Culture Recovery Fund and why it's, I think, so hard to plan for what happens in a year is the dollars they're coming in, and like Evie said, they're going out faster than they're coming in, right? And those are dollars that hit the streets, so to speak, now, right? The application is open right now. It closes the middle of April, and those dollars will turn around within weeks of that. Any funding coming from larger funders like the State Arts Council, we're talking the fall or the winter, right? But the Arts and Culture Recovery Fund is now in real time. And so I think that how long will it last? I'm not sure, but right now it's, sticking around.
Right. And I'd encourage folks to go to the website, njculture.org, New Jersey Arts Culture, .org. We have a Facebook page. We're on Twitter now to learn more. And as Allison said, we're committed to fundraising as long as we have to, but this is a critical time. So what goes away in the next year or so will likely not come back. So we have to really think about what that actually means and how we can help these organizations sustain so that we can have this robust recovery, because we will not have a full recovery without the arts and culture in New Jersey.
Michelle, I just saw one question come through about the importance of social and emotional learning. I don't know if you can, let me see if I can read it here. Oh, you can see it too. Okay, maybe you could take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is shout out to Bobby Panfili, a principal who we worked with. Someone who's very close to young audiences. She's actually on our board. We see this need for children to connect with each other, to build community, and to have a consistent opportunity for their, to nurture their well-being. And so not only young audiences, but many arts organizations are really looking at how we can prepare our artists to support some social emotional learning for students. Especially when they return back to school buildings or when school buildings are fully open in the fall, which is, what looks like it's going to happen. And how do you reintegrate into a community? And how do you, work together again in a way that you haven't had to work together if you've been either hybrid or fully virtual? And how do you grapple with just what you just experienced as a young person? There's no handbook. There's no handbook for us. Tell me there's a handbook for a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, So, it's just going to be critical. And to me, it's also one of those things that feels very in the moment, but is going to be a sustaining need. And it's a hope, that we have, that there is even more appreciation for what the arts can do in a school setting to support children. That as we move back into school buildings in the fall, that there is this growing awareness, and that awareness stays, that an arts-rich school is a great school, period, pandemic or not. So it's really just front and center for us.
It seems like, Michelle, just for all of the reasons that you just said, arts education or arts in schools right now and artists in schools right now is it's an important issue for philanthropists for sure, but also community members and people with stakeholders in education, or just in caring about youth today. I think that, I myself am a parent. I believe that when my children return to school, it's a critical part of not only them enjoying their school, but learning how to, creatively and safely and productively process transition and just recovery. So it seems to me like there's an advocacy element here that I know that this call is not focused on that, but I think as we just think of ourselves as having a voice in community, it's something that really shouldn't go unsaid, right?
Mm-hmm. Agreed. We all live in a school district.
We do.
I think we are out of time. Is that right, Mike, or do we have one more question, or?
Yes, we are out of time.
We are out of time. Well, thank you.
Well, wait, before we jump off, there was one that I saw that said, if I want to give to the Arts and Culture Recovery Fund, what do I do?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
So I figure, hey, if somebody does want to learn more, so Sharnita talked about the website, and njartsculture.org is where you go and you'll have all the information you need, including how to donate if that's.
Can we put a link in the chat or something like that? Or anyway, you can find it. Thank you all. This has been really, thank you to the university. It's been really interesting for me. And it's been a wonderful way to sort of collaborate yet again on raising awareness of the arts and culture sector. And thank you all for joining this panel and for your existing philanthropy and your interest in supporting the arts. And thank you, Mike, for putting this all together. It's been a wonderful afternoon. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Evie, as well, for our fearless moderator.
There you go. We'll take it on the road.
Thank you, everyone. This was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.